3 days. That's how long Matthew Perry was officially fired from Friends in 1997. The network had replacement scripts written, auditions scheduled, and a cover story ready. But something happened that changed everything and brought him back. The truth was buried for 2 decades. October 14th, 1997. Stage 24 at Warner Brothers Studios was buzzing with the usual energy of a Friends filming day when everything changed in an instant. What started as a routine table read for episode 6 of season 4, the one with the dirty girl, became the day that Matthew Perry's career almost ended, and the secret that would haunt the entire Friends family for the next 20 years. Matthew had been struggling with prescription drug addiction for almost 2 years at this point, though he had managed to keep it relatively hidden from the public and even from some of his closest colleagues. His addiction had started innocently enough. Painkillers prescribed after a jet ski accident in 1995 that had left him with recurring back pain, but what began as legitimate medical treatment had slowly evolved into a dependency that was consuming his life and threatening everything he had worked to build. The warning signs had been building for weeks. Matthew had been late to rehearsals, occasionally forgetting lines during filming, and exhibiting behavior that his co-stars recognized as increasingly erratic. But on this particular Tuesday morning, something was different. Something was worse. Jennifer Aniston was the first to notice that Matthew hadn't shown up for the 9 a.m. table read. This was unusual. While Matthew had been struggling with punctuality, he had never missed a table read entirely. By 9:30, when there was still no sign of him, the assistant directors began making calls to his representatives. At 10:15 a.m., David Schwimmer volunteered to check Matthew's dressing room, thinking that perhaps he had arrived early and fallen asleep. What David found when he opened the door would haunt him for years. Matthew was unconscious on his dressing room couch, surrounded by empty pill bottles and barely breathing. "I thought he was dead," David would later confess to close friends. His lips were blue, he wasn't responding to anything, and there were pills everywhere. "I've never been so scared in my life." David immediately called for paramedics while Jennifer, Courtney, Lisa, and Matt rushed to the dressing room. The next 20 minutes were a blur of medical emergency procedures, frantic phone calls, and the horrible realization that their friend and colleague was in the grip of an addiction that had nearly killed him. Matthew was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, where doctors worked to stabilize him and flush the excessive amount of painkillers from his system. The official story released to the media was that he had been hospitalized for exhaustion and dehydration, a generic explanation that the entertainment industry often used to cover more serious health crises. But while Matthew was fighting for his life in the hospital, a very different kind of battle was taking place in the executive offices of Warner Brothers and NBC. Kevin Bright, Marta Kaufman, and David Crane, the creators and executive producers of Friends, found themselves in an emergency meeting with network executives who were delivering an ultimatum that would change everything. Matthew Perry had to go. "This is a liability we can't afford," NBC programming executive Warren Littlefield reportedly said during the meeting. "We have a show worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and we can't have it derailed by one actor's personal problems. We need to make a change now, before this becomes a bigger scandal." The network's position was financially driven but legally sound. Matthew's addiction had created several incidents that could be considered breaches of his contract: missed filming days, unreliable performance, and now a medical emergency that had shut down production. From a business perspective, replacing him was the safest option. Warner Brothers had already begun developing contingency plans. Writers were secretly preparing scripts that would explain Chandler Bing's absence. Perhaps he would be transferred for work or leave town for a family emergency. Casting directors were quietly reaching out to agents, exploring potential replacements who could step into the role with minimal disruption to the show's dynamics. But the Friends creators faced a dilemma that went beyond business considerations. They had watched Matthew develop the character of Chandler Bing from the very first table read in 1994. His comedic timing, his unique delivery style, and his chemistry with the rest of the cast had become integral to the show's success. Replacing him wouldn't just be difficult, it might be impossible. More importantly, they genuinely cared about Matthew as a person. They had seen him struggle, had watched his addiction slowly take hold, and they felt a responsibility to help him rather than abandon him at his lowest point. The meeting stretched on for hours, with network executives pushing for Matthew's immediate termination, and the show's creators arguing for a different approach. Finally, a compromise was reached that would give everyone 3 days to determine the best path forward. Matthew Perry would be officially terminated from Friends, effective immediately. However, the termination would not be announced publicly, and the show's production would be suspended for 72 hours while alternative options were explored. During those 3 days, several different scenarios were considered. The first was simply replacing Matthew with a new actor who would play a different character, Chandler's cousin perhaps, or a new roommate for Joey. The second involved writing Matthew's character out of the show entirely, which would require significant script revisions, but would allow the remaining 5 actors to continue. The third option was the one that ultimately saved Matthew's career, giving him a chance to prove that he could overcome his addiction and return to work as a reliable professional actor. This option was championed most strongly by his 5 co-stars, who collectively made a decision that demonstrated the true depth of their friendship and their commitment to Matthew as both a colleague and a human being. Jennifer Aniston, Courteney Cox, Lisa Kudrow, David Schwimmer, and Matt LeBlanc jointly approached the network executives with a proposal that was unprecedented in television history. They would personally guarantee Matthew's behavior and performance, and they would forfeit a portion of their own salaries if he failed to meet his professional obligations. We told them that Matthew wasn't just our co-worker, he was our friend, Jennifer later revealed in a private interview. We said that, if they were going to fire him for being sick, then they needed to fire all of us, because we weren't going to continue the show without him. The 5 actors also committed to a more personal level of support for Matthew's recovery. They would take turns ensuring that he got to work on time, they would monitor his behavior for signs of relapse, and they would provide the kind of accountability and encouragement that would help him maintain his sobriety. This collective action by the cast created enormous pressure on the network to reconsider their position. Friends was, at that point, NBC's most valuable property, generating hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue and serving as the anchor of their Thursday night lineup. Losing one actor was a manageable problem. Losing the entire cast would be catastrophic. On October 17, 1997, exactly 3 days after Matthew's overdose and termination, he was quietly rehired, with several conditions attached to his return. He would be required to attend daily drug testing, participate in regular counseling sessions, and adhere to a strict schedule that included mandatory check-ins with the show's producers. Matthew, who had spent those 3 days in the hospital and then in intensive outpatient treatment, was overwhelmed by his co-stars' loyalty and support. He would later describe this period as both the worst and most meaningful experience of his life. Worst because he had nearly died from his addiction, but meaningful because it had revealed the true character of the people around him. They didn't have to do that, Matthew said years later in a rare interview about this period. They could have protected their own careers and let me deal with the consequences of my choices, but instead, they put their own jobs on the line to give me a second chance. That's not just friendship, that's family. The decision to keep Matthew's firing secret was made jointly by the cast, the creators, and the network. Everyone understood that public knowledge of his addiction and termination would not only damage his career permanently, but could also affect the show's ratings and the other actors' reputations. For the next 6 years, until Friends ended in 2004, this secret was kept by dozens of people who had been involved in or aware of the incident. Cast members, crew, executives, agents, and publicists all maintained the agreed-upon story that Matthew had been hospitalized for exhaustion and had returned to work after a few days of rest. The truth began to emerge only years later, when Matthew himself started speaking publicly about his addiction and recovery. Even then, many of the specific details, including the fact that he had actually been fired and rehired, were not revealed until much later, when various participants began writing memoirs and giving interviews about their experiences. The 3 days that Matthew Perry was fired from Friends became a turning point not just for him, but for the entire show. The experience of nearly losing him brought the cast closer together and created a support system that helped Matthew maintain his sobriety for several more years. It also established a precedent for how the entertainment industry could handle addiction and mental health crises among high-profile performers. Instead of simply cutting ties with troubled employees, the Friends example showed that intervention, support, and accountability could be more effective than abandonment. Matthew's recovery wasn't immediate or perfect. He would struggle with addiction for many more years, experiencing several relapses and requiring additional treatment. But the foundation of support that was established during those 3 days in October 1997 provided him with a safety net that probably saved his life multiple times. The other cast members never spoke publicly about the personal and financial risks they took to save Matthew's career, but their actions demonstrated a level of loyalty and compassion that is rare in any industry, let alone entertainment. When Matthew Perry died in 2023, his Friends co-stars were among the first to speak about his courage in battling addiction and his generosity in sharing his story to help others. But they still didn't reveal the full story of what they had done to save him in 1997. The secret of Matthew Perry's 3-day termination from Friends is more than just an interesting piece of television history. It's a testament to the power of friendship, loyalty, and the belief that people deserve second chances when they're fighting for their lives. It's also a reminder that behind the laughter and entertainment that made Friends such a beloved show, there were real people dealing with real struggles, and sometimes the most important drama happened not in front of the cameras, but in the quiet moments when friends chose to stand by each other, no matter what the cost.